You are listening to the Thoughts from a Page podcast, which is a member of the Evergreen Podcasts Network. My name is Cindy Burnett, and I love to talk about books with anyone and everyone. While listening to my podcast, you will hear author interviews, behind-the-scenes conversations about various aspects of the publishing world, theme discussions with other book lovers, and more. For more book recommendations and a complete list of all of my interviews, check out my website, thoughtsfromapage.com, and follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Thoughts From A Page. In 2022, I would love for you to join my Patreon group. I offer at least 2 bonus episodes a month and a monthly advanced read and pre-publication author chat. For those on Facebook, I host a special Patreon Facebook group where we all chat books. Thanks so much to those who already participate, and I hope you will consider joining us. Today, I am chatting with Louise Kennedy about Trespasses. Louise grew up near Belfast, and Trespasses is her first novel. She is also the author of a collection of short stories, The End of the World is a Cul-de-sac. She has written for The Guardian, The Irish Times, and BBC Radio 4. Before becoming a writer, she worked as a chef for almost 30 years. Louise lives in Ireland. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And now for a quick break. For the last year, I have been focusing more on my health and eating habits. In connection with that, I have started drinking AG1 in the morning. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my health and energy levels. That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. I recommend AG1 to all of my family and friends because the company has a team of doctors and scientists. It is tested for 950 contaminants and is NSF certified for sport. It is formulated based on the latest science, and it maintains high quality standards. Thanks AG1 for sponsoring my show. AG1 is a supplement I trust to provide the support my body needs daily. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. That's drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. Check it out. And now back to my show. Welcome, Louise. How are you today?
I am very well indeed, Cindy. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing quite well myself, and I'm thrilled to pieces to speak with you because I loved Trespasses.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to hear.
Well, what I usually do is ask the author to give a quick synopsis of the book for those that won't have read it yet. So could you do that for me?
Yes. So Trespasses is a love story, first and foremost, I guess. It is set in a small town on the shores of Belfast Lough in 1975. And it's about a young Catholic teacher called Cushla Lavery, who teaches in a primary school by day, and by night she helps out in her family's bar. And it's there that she meets a man called Michael, who is older than her, and he's a Protestant, and he's also married. So there are, I guess, there are obstacles from the outset.
What made you want to tell this story, and then how did you go about telling it?
I suppose Cushla, as she finally became in this story, is a character that I've maybe been working with on and off for a few years. Quite a few years ago, I wrote a play, which, I'm very determined that it'll never see the light of day because it's not very good. But it did feature a young woman in her 20s in the north of Ireland who's working behind the bar. And I think in that play as well, a man walks in and there's an attraction. But that man is probably... he's probably a bit of a tragic figure, actually, really. Maybe Michael is the man that's in the novel too. And then in a short story that I wrote a few years ago, there's a young woman in. So I think that Cushla was maybe a character that I was trying to find a place for. And really the impetus for writing the novel probably came in March 2019 when I got a diagnosis for melanoma. And until then, I'd been writing short stories. I had, the makings of a collection there. And I suppose finding out that maybe I couldn't presume that I'd have a long life maybe really gave me the kick in the backside that I needed to force myself to write a novel, because I couldn't presume that, I could wander around for 20 years kind of playing at writing a novel. So that probably really did, provide a tremendous impetus. Yeah, so I had around, I think, two and a half, 3 months off work, and I managed to. I kind of made a deal with myself that I try and sit at the computer every day and write 1,000 words, and that didn't happen every day, but it happened often enough that I had a draft ready, I suppose, within about 3 months.
That is so fast, but I guess the melanoma kind of pushed you along.
Yeah, and it also meant that, I wasn't doing anything else. I think my family were kind of looking after me, so I was probably relieved of a lot of the things that I might have been normally doing around the house. I wasn't at work. I wasn't out and about, so it probably gave a lot of structure to my days. I think that it really, it's really strange, actually. I think that I sort of can't separate having cancer from the novel, because my cancer came back, and when I was working through the final edits, I was there was a bit of uncertainty then as well, and I think it's really been a blessing in a way. I think that it's worked both ways. That maybe having cancer has given me perspective on the novel, and that I just really see the writing as work. And then I think that having a book out in the world has been a hugely kind of positive distraction from the treatment and stuff as well. So it's been kind of great. Like, they weirdly complement each other.
Well, first, I'm sorry that the cancer came back. I know that had to be disheartening.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think I'm probably quite good at not really thinking about things, So I'm really good at finding distractions. So I mostly deal with things by not dealing with them, and that's been working pretty well so far. But the main thing is that I'm on immunotherapy treatment that's really working kind of insanely well. So I am feeling fairly positive about that. So hopefully it's all going to be okay.
That's wonderful. I will be definitely sending you good thoughts.
Oh, thank you.
And I hear what you're saying on the book being a good distraction. I've lost both my parents in the last year. And if I'm not trying to focus on something like the podcast or something else, related to my work, it's really easy to kind of, let yourself get sucked into all the negativity. So having something positive to focus on, something else to do, can be just really a wonderful distraction.
It can. And I'm sorry, that's a lot of loss in 1 year. I'm sorry that happened to you. That's a lot, isn't it?
It is a lot. But, I think it's been a crazy however many years for a lot of us. So,
it's been wild. Absolutely. Yeah.
But I do think having the distraction is really nice. And I just thought your book was fantastic. And I know a little bit about the Troubles, but not a lot. Why did you decide to set it during the Troubles?
I think that maybe 1975. I mean, I just kind of I had an idea that maybe it felt to me that I picked a random year in the Troubles and set it then. But I think that really, on reflection, it was quite a significant year for me as a child, because Cushley, in her day job, teaches a class of 7 or 8 year olds, and I was 8 in 1975, and my family had a bar, the same way the Cushley's family do, and in 1970, late 1973, a bomb was planted there. It's like 150 pounds of explosives were packed into a beer keg and left by the entrance, and somebody spotted the bomb and it was defused. About 6 months later, another bomb was planted, and it did detonate, and it caused some damage. Nobody was injured, but it caused damage to the business. But also, I think that a second bomb so soon was a fairly clear message to my family that people wanted us out of business and out of the town. So my family began to leave, and it meant that I went from living within walking distance from all the relatives on my father's side to half of them being gone. That my uncles and their young families, who I used to walk around and see my cousins when they were little babies, they were gone. And then we left the north a few years later and moved down south. So I think that maybe that was a really significant year for me. That's possibly why I set it then. Maybe there was also something in the fact that I had another idea for a novel, and it's the one that I've begun to work on. But I do think that maybe my diagnosis gave the telling of that particular story, even though the characters in Trespasses are completely fictional. Maybe I did want to leave a record of what it was like, for people like us to live in that place at that time.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because it's so foreign to me to have these type of things happening, like the bombs going off and people just being killed right and left, and everything being so split and so splintered, Presbyterian, Catholics. Like, it's just such a difficult thing for me to understand, not having lived through it. And I just think it must have been so incredibly stressful.
I think it definitely was very stressful. And I think, really on reflection, I think that my friends and I and my sisters and, all the kids around me were being brought up by nervous wrecks. I think that adults had to navigate a huge set of complications every day, really, that it was, I think that people rarely freely said what was on their mind because they were afraid of offending somebody, very often in those days as well, that of course offending somebody could lead to something pretty sinister. So I think there was that. I think as well, because we were in a minority community. So we were, like Kushla and her family, we were Catholics in a town that was about 90% Protestant. And that meant that we had to probably conduct ourselves in a particular way, which is to not offend anybody, not to draw attention to ourselves too much, even though it's difficult to do that when you have a bar and your name is above the door. Everybody knows who you are and what sort of background you're from. So I think all of those things were everyday things, were really terribly stressful as well. That if you walked into a supermarket, someone would be at the door to look in your handbag for weapons and explosives. There were metal detectors in use all the time. The security in Belfast city centre was really heavy. There were these sort of metal barriers and turnstiles, and police and army standing around, and men and women separated and being searched. It was really pretty crazy, but yet people went about their business and just, found a way to live their lives. So, maybe that's something that I was interested in. It was just how even when the simplest things have become really complicated and sinister, I suppose, that people find a way to live.
Exactly. That they're able to keep going and live their lives, but you're dealing with this added layer, really added layers, everything you're describing, so foreign to what I think many people are used to dealing with. And you're talking about the armed guards, and that makes me think a little bit about 9/11. And I visited New York City about maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks after 9/11. And it was that same way around Times Square particularly, but all over New York City, armed guards on every corner. And that stuck out to me, and I still remember it. And what you're describing goes way beyond that, the metal detectors and checking handbags and all of that.
Yeah, I think so. And do you know what I think, though, that I would imagine, because I wasn't there after 9/11, but I think that, if there's that sort of security, if you walk through an airport in some place, I don't know, I used to live in the Middle East, and, you'd go into Beirut Airport, and there'd be a lot of armed people around. But maybe it's been quite a few years since there's been any kind of incident. So it doesn't feel like an imminent threat. But I would imagine that, straight after 9/11, that probably, you're looking at people with guns, and also you're thinking, okay, this horrendous thing happened here. There was a horrendous terror attack here recently. So I think that maybe that's where a lot of the fear comes from. It's that, something has just happened and it might happen again. And that was kind of a constant thing for us. And, I was speaking to somebody from America a couple of weeks ago, who said that some of the descriptions that I have in the book of, there's one scene in the book where there's a bomb scare in the school, and the children have to evacuate into the church nearby. And, this person I was talking to said that it really reminded them of the drills that children in the US have to go through in schools now because of gun violence.
I think that's right. The active shooter drills, which always just hurt my heart when I hear one of my kids has had to do that. It really shatters me. But it is, I think you're exactly right. It did make me think of some of that. And it's just horrifying. And, just to have as a parent or a child to be living through what you're describing during that time period. I can remember being in London in the 90s and I couldn't find a trash can on the street. And I finally asked somebody, why are there no trash cans on the street? And they're like looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, bomb threats. And I was like, what?
Bomb threats? Absolutely. Yeah. And there were no public public toilets when I was a child. So, which was fun. And a lot of, if my parents took us anywhere, there were 3 girls in the back of the car, and we were in complete paroxysms of, where's the toilet? But there just weren't any public loos for the same reason. Really crazy stuff, when very ordinary facilities aren't available because of that sort of thing. So, at every level, even the tiny little, the tiniest little detail like that, if you add it all up, it really does make for quite a lot of stress and quite an abnormal way of living.
Absolutely. Before you even get to what you were describing of having to kind of monitor yourself, lay low, be careful what you say, there were so many reprisals, it just kind of builds on itself.
Yeah, that's it. And that was, that was definitely happening. They called them tit-for-tat killings. So, maybe soldiers would be killed, and then, a couple of days later, maybe a couple of Catholic workers might have been shot by loyalist paramilitaries who would say that was in reprisal for, that attack. And it would just go on and on and on. And it went on and on like that for years, for many years.
Definitely. Well, shifting gears from that, one of the things that I found interesting was that you don't use quotation marks. And I'm seeing that a little bit more in writing. So can we talk about that?
Okay, so this is funny because I do that just because I think that I'm not a terribly tidy person in the rest of my life, but I do try and apply quite a bit of discipline when I'm writing. I think it's just that I quite like how it looks on the page to not have any. And also, I think it demands quite a bit of, it does demand a bit of the writer, because you do have to apply quite a bit of discipline and just to make it, make sure that it's very clear who's speaking. And and then I think I've realized that some people don't love that. So I hope you didn't find it really irritating. And I hope you knew who was speaking. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I think some other writers might do that these days. I think, does Sally Rooney do it? Did somebody tell me that Sally Rooney does that?
She does. And Paulette Giles did it in the News of the World. So yes, no, I think it's becoming more common. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. In fact, I don't think I even noticed it until about 3/4 of the way through the book. But it's a conversation I've had repeatedly with readers, sometimes other authors. And so I'm always just fascinated to hear how that came about and kind of a glimpse into why they are not present in your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's just that I think I kind of like how it looks on the page. It makes the pages look quite clean. And I think also in some way it has a way of, I was trying to keep, it's like Trespasses is written in the third person in the past tense, but also I wanted it to be really, really close to Cushle's point of view. And I think that by not having quotation marks, I hope that it beds the dialogue a bit more deeply down into the text and makes it feel very close, especially to Cushle's voice. I hope it has that effect.
Well, and I also think sometimes it's almost what they're thinking versus what they're saying. It's what they're saying, but in terms of telling the story, sometimes it just kind of gave me that impression.
Yes, exactly. That's it. And that can be kind of interesting as well, because just with playing with voice and stuff, and how to make even the thoughts sound as if they're being spoken in a person's voice. Yeah, so all of that's kind of interesting. It's kind of fun to do.
It definitely is. Well, let's talk a little bit about the title and the cover. I love the cover. I understand it's a painting. I saw that on the back flap of the book. Do you just love it?
I completely love it. In fact, I think I love it even more every time I look at it. It's gorgeous. And also, I'm a little bit jealous because a lot of the people I've spoken with have been flashing at me finished copies of the book. So at the moment, I still have an ARC, and I'm really deranged to get my hands on the lovely hard copy because they look beautiful from a distance.
Oh, they are beautiful. I can't believe that. Yes, I am looking at a hard copy. And you need one.
I need one. I think they're on the way, but I'm very excited. Yeah, and it's just been an absolute dream to deal with Becky Salatin and the others in Riverhead. I just think they've done just such an amazing job at publishing this book. I couldn't have asked for more.
And how about the title, Trespasses? Was that the title you came up with from the beginning, or how did that come about?
No, it wasn't the title from the beginning, but so the working title for the book, and it was only ever a working title, was When I Moved to the Sky. And you've read Trespasses and know that it's divided into 5 sections, and they each each section has a name, and one of them is called When I Moved to the Sky. So it's still there in some form. I think it's kind of lovely, but also it's maybe a little bit whimsical. And I think my editor in the UK and my editor in the US felt that there was a word out there somewhere that was much stronger, that would say more about the book. And so I come up with Trespasses. I suppose there are a few reasons for that. I certainly first heard the word trespasses when I was a small child, and I learned the Lord's Prayer. And, it suggests sin. And it's a word that isn't or wrongdoing, but it's a word that certainly in my experience, it wasn't used in that context elsewhere. People didn't use it in normal speech. So it's kind of a memorable word from that point of view. But also I hope it works to convey other lines being crossed. Maybe there are moral lines being crossed. Kushla is in a relationship with a married man. I guess this sort of sexual relationship that she has is probably at odds with her Catholic upbringing. And there are class lines being crossed, there are religious, political lines being crossed. And then, there's the kind of physical trespassing of Kushla leaving, the small town that she's in, to go to Belfast to meet this man. So, yeah, I hope that the title operates on a few levels.
I think it definitely does. And that's so interesting that you say that about the Lord's Prayer, because that's the first thing I always think when I see the word trespasses as well.
Yes.
But I definitely think it works on various levels for your book.
Oh, great. I'm delighted. That's great to hear.
Well, what about what you've read recently that you really liked?
Okay, so this year I have read, it's a nonfiction book by an Irish journalist. Her name is Sally Hayden. And it has already won a couple of prizes, and I think that hasn't finished yet. My Fourth Time We Drowned. And Sally's a journalist, and this book is about the experience of people leaving Africa for a new life in Europe, and about those horrendous journeys they make across the very rough Mediterranean Sea in the winter, and how really it's a form of human trafficking. And I suppose it's also about the really extraordinary and cruel extent to which Europe will go to keep them out. But I just think the title would put the heart across you. So that's a book that's been really significant to me in the last while. Also, there is a book that was published earlier this year by a writer who's also from the north of Ireland called Lucy Caldwell. It's published by Faber in the UK, and it's called These Days. And it's a really beautifully written book set in Belfast in 1941 during the Blitz, the German bombing. So Belfast really only experienced bombing for a very short time, but there were two nights that were really, extremely heavy. And but this is just a beautiful book. So those would be my two favorites at the moment. It changes all the time.
Well, I get that. Just depends on what you get asked, right?
Exactly.
I'm not even sure, to show my complete ignorance, that I knew that Belfast had been bombed at all. I need to track that book down because I really, really like World War II stories.
Oh, yeah, it's a really beautiful book, actually. So, yeah, Belfast was, people in the UK don't even know that Belfast was bombed. It was bombed only a few different nights, but one particular night, it was the worst single bombing in the entire Blitz outside of London, like worse than Coventry, worse than Liverpool or any of those places. I think Belfast lost something like 20% of its housing stock in one night. And obviously, if it's housing stock, then many lives were lost, and the place was really devastated for quite a long time.
Oh, wow. Truly, I had no idea. And I think that's one of those interesting things about World War II is there are just so many stories to be told and so many different things happening in so many different countries. And so in terms of trying to make sure you learn it all, well, I'm going to definitely track that book down. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. And I think, because she's not trying to do anything sort of grandly political there, but it's just, the book is the story of two sisters, two young women. It takes place the story unfolds over sort of 2 or 3 nights. And it's just beautiful. And you really feel that you're walking the streets of a burning Belfast with them. It's incredible.
Well, in those types of books, a strong sense of place, which is what I really liked about your book as well, are my favorites, where you truly feel like you have been transported to that location.
Yeah, I love that too. And Lucy's brilliant at it. I think there's probably there are very few other writers who can write a book in a city like her. She's amazing.
Well, I felt like you had transported me to 1970s Belfast, so I totally get that, and I love it.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Louise, for taking the time to talk to me today and coming on the Thoughts from a Page podcast.
Oh, thank you, Cindy, for having me. Honestly, it's been lovely.
Thank you.
Don't you know that you're a grown-up?
I'm a grown-up.
Me too.
Yep, me too. But these days being a grown-up can really suck.
Luckily, we're grown-ups who grew up in the coolest generation.
We had video arcades.
And also some of the best TV and movies ever made.
We lived the origin of awesome consumer electronics. The list goes on and on.
Yep, Generation X.
Exactly.
And we're Gen X grown-up.
Every week, the Gen X Grown Up podcast explores media, tech, toys, games, and more from both yesterday and today.
Through the eyes of Generation Xers who absolutely love that stuff. You can can find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
Or find us on our website, genxgrownup.com.
Life sucks as a grown-up.
All right, you think that was good enough?
I hope so, man. I'm tired.
Who listens to a promo on a podcast and then goes and listens to a different podcast?
Right.
I've never done it.
No.
Right.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you like this episode, and I hope you did, please follow me on Instagram at Thoughts From a Page. Consider joining my Patreon group to access bonus content and support the podcast. Tell all of your friends about the show and rate it or subscribe to it wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it. The book discussed in this episode can be purchased at my bookshop storefront, and the link is in the show notes. I hope you'll tune in next time.
Don't you know that you're a grown-up?
I'm a grown-up.
Me too.
Yep, me too. But these days being a grown-up can really suck.
Luckily, we're grown-ups who grew up in the coolest generation.
We had video arcades.
And also some of the best TV and movies ever made.
We lived the origin of awesome consumer electronics. The list goes on and on.
Yep. Generation X.
Exactly.
And we're Gen X grown-up.
Every week, the Gen X Grown Up podcast explores media, tech, toys, games, and more from both yesterday and today.
Through the eyes of Generation Xers who absolutely love that stuff. You can find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
Or find us on our website, genxgrownup.com.
Life sucks as a grown-up.
All right, you think that was good enough?
I hope so, man. I'm tired.
Who listens to a promo on a podcast and then goes and listens to a different podcast?
Right.
I've never done it.
No.
Right.